Okay guys, what's up? Amel here, back in the studio. Recently I have been getting into a lot of progressive house. Normally my music style is like a lot of future bounce, future house, and I don't know, just recently I just like the style, and I am not like a super good producer at progressive house yet, I feel like, but I've just been starting to mess around more with it and come up with some interesting ideas of progressive house. Yeah, I think I really like the style. So this was just a couple of days ago. I was listening to some other music and all of a sudden a melody just popped into my head. At the time I thought it was a super sick melody, so of course I ran over to FL Studio and started writing down the project, and what you heard was the result. I ended up posting that to my story, just a little preview of the track, and a lot of people ended up DMing me and they're like, yo, this is sick, but it sounds a lot like No Sleep by Martin Garrix. I don't think it sounds entirely exactly the same, but it's definitely very similar. So I wasn't going to turn it into an original because of that, but I figured because the project was already made, I might as well make a tutorial out of it and show you guys how to make progressive house. So yeah, that's what we're working with today. This project that could have been a sick original, but of course is not. It was too much of a ripoff, but I already had the project, so that's what we're working with today. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Okay, so like I just told you, the first thing that came about with this track was the melody. I am a big melody guy. Most of my tracks start with a melody, and this track was no different. So I'm just going to play you the leads here, which is the first thing I started with, and then we'll just go through some of the presets and look at all the processing and that stuff. So I actually made these leads very quickly. Normally with a lot of my tracks, I'll go through and start working on like sound design and make my own presets and stuff, which is honestly just annoying because it takes too long. With this track, I actually just used a bunch of presets. I just probably like a month ago downloaded this pack. It's called Lost Volume 2, and it's a super good pack. Not sponsored in any way. I paid for it, I downloaded it, but I've been super happy with the pack. I've been mostly using their samples, but this was the first project that I started trying to use their sound bank, and yeah, I was super happy with it. It made my workflow super fast. I'm just gonna mute a couple of these and show you all the leads individually. And then finally, this very last one here is in Serum, and this is actually a preset. Once I had all those leads, I thought it sounded good, and then I ended up coming back and just making my own preset. Just wanted to add like a little bit more body. So this is what this sounds like. Just helps kind of fill it out. I just created it from an init preset. Okay, so for processing, it's pretty simple. All these leads sounded good right off the bat, so I didn't have to do a ton. First, I pretty much just cut out the low end. That's very standard. I boosted a tiny bit of the highs, but really this EQ is very minimal. Right below that, I added a tiny bit of soft clipping in Serum Effects. I know I've talked about this before, but I love using Serum Effects. There's just like an entire, so many selection of like different effects just in one plugin. So I love this plugin. Below here, I have peak controller and reverb. This is just ducking the volume of the reverb as the sound plays, as you can see. But it's still a pretty wet sound. I have like a little over 4 seconds of decay time, so it just makes this like huge, super epic kind of sounding lead. Interestingly enough, I have this OTT which is kind of doing two things. The first thing is I'm actually kind of using it as an EQ, and the way I'm doing that is you can drag these bands around. So I have the high end, I'm taking out some of the highs, and I'm using some of the mids, so I'm actually kind of using it more as an EQ than compression, but it's also after the reverb, which means it's also compressing the reverb. So even though this reverb is at 4 seconds of decay time, having this OTT after it compresses that reverb and makes the tail even longer. So it just makes the reverb sound even like kind of glued together with the original leads and makes it sound even bigger. I don't know if it's like technically a correct way of doing that, of producing, but it sounds good. So that's what I did. Finally, the very last thing we have on here is just a tiny bit more EQ. I just felt like it needed a tiny bit more brightness on the lead, so I just boosted that up right at like 15, 16K hertz, and yeah, that just adds like a little bit of extra sparkle. So after I'd created the sort of main body of the leads, I felt like there just needed to be a little extra punch just to make the leads stand out. So I added one layer. This is a super simple layer. It's actually just one preset in Nexus. It's a violin preset, a spiccato. It sounds like this. As you can see, it's not playing all the notes. It's actually just hitting on very specific notes to sort of accent it. So it just makes certain notes in the melody stand out. Down here, one more layer. This is literally just white noise from Cashmere that I chopped up to follow along with the leads. It's very subtle in the mix, but it just helps the leads stand out. If it's not there, that's just lacking a little bit of high end. And so here, I'll play it for you. Here's the leads without it. And then we add the white noise. Yeah, very subtle, but I'm sure you guys all know this trick by now. It just helps the lead stand out and just a bit more prominent in the mix. Now, there's one final thing that I did to the leads that makes them just a bit more interesting. Also a very subtle thing, but what I did, I'll turn off this LFO for a second. I created a volume automation on the effects chain for the leads. And so this ducks down the volume just a tiny, tiny bit. It's very subtle, but just on a certain couple notes. And so it ducks it down. And so the note right after that volume decrease just hits a bit harder. So it just helps create the melody, makes it a bit more punchy. Then also what I did, I think I've showed you guys this before. If you double click on the automation clip, you can actually turn on LFO. So I went like this, turn that on. And then I've created an automation for the LFO. So on these same certain notes, it actually creates this kind of like wobbly effect. You're probably not going to hear it too much. I'm just going to go like this and really boost the effect so it's exaggerated. Obviously that's super overkill, but if I go like this and just make it super subtle, it just adds a little bit more extra kind of movement to the lead. And I think it, yeah, just tiny little details. That's what counts. So after I was happy with the leads and had made those, it was time to make the chords. So in a progressive house track, the chords are really the body of the track. They help fill up, obviously, the frequency spectrum, but you also don't want them to be too crazy loud in the mix. They're more just a supportive element and not super prominent. Again, I created all of these chords using the presets from the Lost sound bank. This is actually an interesting one. What I did is I dragged in the sound bank, and the first preset that was on here was a lead preset. So this is actually technically not supposed to be used for chords, but it just worked super well. It sounded really good as a chord preset. And finally, this is one of the last presets, and I want to tell you a bit about this. What's going on with here is it sounds like this. Hopefully you can hear it's playing the same exact chord pattern as all the other chords, but it actually has this arpeggiator turned on and chopping it up to 16th notes. So it's essentially playing the same chords, but it's just adding like a bit of extra movement. It's chopping it up and it just helps bring the energy and keep pushing the track along. It's pretty subtle in the mix, but it's just like this constant rhythm, and I really think it helps bring energy to the track. Again, for processing on these chords, there's really nothing complicated. Pretty much I just chopped out the low end at like 170 Hertz, added a bit of OTT, and again, I'm almost using this to kind of shape the sound, so I'm taking away a bit of the highs with OTT. I added one more EQ, which I actually boosted back the highs just a tiny bit, shaped the sound even more. Felt like they needed to be a bit wider to create a body, so I just added a tiny bit of stereo widening. Again, I have some reverb, and this is also controlled by another peak controller, just to fill up the space and just make the chords sound big and lush. And then I have a fruity balance, which I don't even think I'm using. So below the chords, there's another couple elements that they're not like part of the chord stack, but they're pretty much, I don't know, they're just like atmosphere sounds. They kind of help add to the chords. This first one is an audio sample. It's kind of like these voices, just like these big airy voices in the background. I have another sample, which is already sidechained, sounds like this. And then these two down here are some of my favorite samples in the project. This is not a sponsored video by any means, but if you guys know MHA, he's an absolutely awesome producer. If not, go check him out. He just came out with his second volume of guitar sessions. It's called MHA Guitar Sessions Volume 2. He came out with that. I watched the video and I thought, why not? I'll go buy it. And I bought it just a couple weeks ago, and it's absolutely amazing. I've been using it in all my tracks since I've gotten it. Again, not sponsored. I paid for it fully, but I just want to shout it out because it's a seriously good pack. So yeah, go check it out. So this is the first layer added from that pack. It sounds like this. Technically, some of the chords in this guitar loop aren't actually exactly the same chords I have in my song. So if you listen really closely, technically it's like clashing a tiny bit, but I've cut out a lot of the low end and it's low enough in the mix where it doesn't really matter. It just more adds sort of like a very organic sound to the track. Then below here, I have another guitar loop, which is kind of more just like ambient. It sounds like this. It's pretty much just exactly what it is. I just dragged this in and chopped it up a bit so it would fit the rhythm of the song a bit better. Then under that, we have our basses as well as the sub bass. I'm just gonna play them together and they sound like this. So if you guys haven't guessed it by now, of course, I ended up using the same music core presets from the Lost Volume 2 to create all these basses. So I'll just go through those individually here. So this one is the last preset that I have, and again I just wanted to point out that just like the chord stack, it has this arpeggiator turned on and it's playing the same rhythm, those 16th notes. It's pretty low in the mix, like it's not one of the most prominent basses, but it just adds that rhythm and keeps the track pushing forward. So let me just show you how much of a difference it makes. If I turn this off, and if I turn this on, I'll just boost it up so you can hear it a bit better. Obviously that's overkill, but I just turned it down in the mix and it's very subtle, but it just has that rhythm that brings a lot of energy to the track. And of course the sub bass, super simple, nothing complicated here. It's just 2 sine waves and it sounds like this. The bass line itself here is actually pretty simple, but one thing that I find makes a huge difference and adds a lot of energy to progressive tracks like this is adding these pitch bends. So if I turn this off, you'll see it sounds pretty static. Just very static, not too interesting. And then what I did is I just went in here, and if you touch this knob and then you go up here and you say create automation clip, you can actually link as many of these as you want to the same automation clip. So I've created this pitch bend and it sounds like this. Just like the chords and the leads, processing on the basses is fairly simple. I have a little bit of EQ cutting out some of the high end, just unnecessary, and it sounded a bit too harsh. I have some OTT, which is gluing the basses together a bit. I have some Camel Crusher, which is just adding some distortion and just making the sound a bit fatter. Sausage Fattener, which is also just adding some more saturation and stuff like that. I actually have Stereo Enhancer. I just wanted the basses to be a bit wider in the mix and kind of mesh with the chords better. And then, yeah, kickstart for sidechaining. So before we move on to the drums, there's one last thing I want to show you, and that is this little ARP I created. This is a super simple ARP I created just in Silent 1 from an init preset. Just has a bit of a cutoff filter, and then I actually automated this cutoff filter. So technically it's playing through the beginning of the drop as well. Just in the beginning of the drop, it's super cut off, so it's very low in the mix and not a lot of high end. But then it opens up here, and then the second part of the drop in the second half, and it's playing like that, and just adds a bunch of energy and a little bit more rhythm and keeps the track pushing along. So now that we've gone over all the instruments individually, I'm going to play them all together without the drums so you can hear what they sound like. So for these drums, I actually used samples from all over. They're kind of random, but I think they work well together. So this first one, this is the kick, and this is actually, I had a different kick in here for a while, but I just switched it out recently to a kick. This is from the Anima Volume 2 sound pack. I've been using this sound pack again for just a couple weeks, and this is what the kick sounds like. Just a nice full body kick. Under here, I have this little percussion loop. It's some rides and claps and stuff. Here's some more claps. Down here we have some more percussive elements. This is a little loop. I actually have no idea where this came from, but it's some like Martin Garrix sort of style fills. Under here, I have a crash, and it's kind of panning around. It's very low in the mix, but it just adds a bit of energy. There's kind of some high end, sounds pretty cool. And under that, then I have some crashes and some downlifters and risers and stuff like that. And if you're wondering, also in the second half of the drop, there's just a couple more percussion loops and some fills and stuff to just pretty much add energy to the track. So one more time, I'll just play it from like the second half of the drop and you can hear what the drums sound like all together. Alright, so that was how I created the full drop of the track. Once I had done that, just for the sake of this tutorial, of course, I wanted to do a little bit of a build-up. I pretty much just dragged elements from the drop and dragged them over here, used some like cutoff filters and stuff to make them a bit lower in the mix, as well as took away the sidechain and things like that. Added some build-up drums, but yeah, pretty simple stuff. And just, yeah, typical build-up stuff. There's one more thing that I added, and this was kind of as a joke because so many people had told me this drop sounds like No Sleep. So of course I had to go and just drag in the acapella of No Sleep. I'm sure you guys all know it. It sounds like this. I don't need no sleep 'cause I'm already dreaming. So I just added that in for fun on top of the build-up. But I think that's pretty much it. In just a second, I will do a full playthrough of the track so you can hear it all together. But if I've missed anything or you have any questions, feel free to message me down below in the comment section, or you can reach out to me on Instagram. As always, I will have the FLP available down in the description if you want to download it, and you can download all the presets and check out all my mixing and mastering and all the little techniques I've used. Just go into more detail and find that out for yourself. So I think that's gonna be a wrap on this project. I hope you guys have learned something from it. Hope it's brought some value to you in your production skills and all that. And at this point, I'm literally just saying a bunch of nonsense. So I'm gonna shut up now. Thank you so much for watching. And without further ado, here is the final result. I don't need no sleep 'cause I'm already dreaming.